Welcome back to season 2 of the Show Me You Know Me show. We loved all of the positive feedback you gave us, but you guys, I have to tell you, what a learning curve. Shifting my seat from being the interviewee to the interviewer is a totally new ballgame. The amount of prep you have to do, even with a really talented team, is monumental. Making sure that we ask the right questions, making sure we follow the story correctly, making sure that we don't go too far down one rabbit hole or thread and really pack all the value in. Holy moly, it's a tough job. So I absolutely loved getting this seat. I loved having this new learning curve, and man, it really stretched me into a whole new outside of my comfort zone area. But with that said, we cannot wait to see what you think of season 2. And my goodness, the amount of incredible talent that we have up our sleeve in terms of our guests. I can't wait for you guys to hear who we have and to hear what you think about them. So here we go. Our first guest is Jamie Lawless, CEO at Husch Blackwell. And what an incredible guest to get to speak with, not only due to her decade-long tenure at a prestigious firm called Baker Mackenzie and her subsequent rise at Husch Blackwell, but also due to the openness she brings to the conversation around her struggles with infertility. I know her story will resonate with so many of you, and I cannot wait to see what you guys think. Jamie, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I think the stories that you have, the background you have is so tremendous, and I cannot wait to dive into it. I don't know how I'm going to get through everything in 25 to 30 minutes, but here we go. We usually try not to start out with a very braggy note, but am I right in remembering that in New York, when you were living there until the age of 32, you slept in a storage loft in the East Village? Tell us about that.
All right, Sam, we are really starting with the good stuff, huh?
High glamour.
Yes, well, high glamour, exactly, or grit, right? Either way. Look, it's interesting the things that we will compromise to live and work in one of the best cities in the world. And I happen to be fortunate enough out of college to land a job at Accenture way back when. In fact, it was so long ago that Accenture was Anderson Consulting at the time. And I was based in our New York office and, had the honor of living with 4, 5, 6 roommates for the first several years I was out of school. And very shortly after landing my second job out of college, I was able to get my own apartment. But of course, that meant a very small shoebox studio apartment in the East Village, which was a very cool spot to be. And it was actually a great experience because I had a whole living section with two storage lofts. One I slept in and the other I kept, my summer clothes when it was winter. So I guess it could have been worse off. I think Carrie Bradshaw said that she stored her shoes in her New York City apartment oven. So at least I had a storage.
Oh, there's the email language.
You know.
Sex and the City is one of my favorite shows ever. I will not bore our listeners with that, but oh my gosh. So you started at Accenture, which I feel like would be an incredible place to start out. Tell us about that experience, learnings that you had. What a wild ride, I'm sure.
Yeah. So Accenture was a really phenomenal place to start, particularly when you're fresh out of school and really know very little about anything, right? We think that we know so much about the world, and then we get out there and it's oftentimes a pretty rude awakening. But the one thing I didn't have to worry about coming out of school was having access to and exposure to very high level executives. And so my initial projects were with the likes of Sony, Sharp Electronics, Bristol Myers Squibb, Johnson & Johnson. So you're kind of thrown onto these projects as a consultant, and you're working side by side with the consulting partners. So you're learning from the best, and you really got a seat at the table when really interesting decisions are being made by both the Accenture team, but also by the client team. And so it's changing a bit, but I have always found that on-the-job training is so powerful, and being in the room, even if you don't have a leading role, being able to absorb and learn from those who really know their stuff is really impactful. And so at a very early age, like I said, I was in the room, I had a seat at the table. I was able to see what I appreciated from executives in their decision-making process. And also I was able to recognize things that maybe I didn't think were that impactful. And I think ultimately having exposure to those many case studies, if you will, through consulting and at all of these different organizations helped inform the leader that I was going to be, because I knew the impact that these really successful individuals had on me as a young consultant, a junior consultant. And I was able to see the impact to the client as well, right? Through the engagements that I was part of.
I think we find people find themselves in the same boat. So either they're thrown in the room with executives, or sometimes they're leading people who are 20 or 25 years their senior. Was there any sense of imposter syndrome that kicked in when you were in that room? Was there anything that you did to level yourself up quickly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, I felt imposter syndrome, and it was probably rightly so that early in my career. You really are learning so much from the engagements that you're part of, and the discussions that you're part of, and the work that you're given access to. And so I think going in with a sense of humbleness that I was still learning built more credibility than coming into a new role and talking about something that I had no business talking about. In fact, I've learned over the years that you're better off knowing what not to say, especially when you work with lawyers. Like, you have to know your stuff. And so, coming out as a junior consultant, my role was to learn. And then once I had a comfort level that I could take something and run with it, was to ask for that autonomy. And then, of course, deliver. And early on, you miss deadlines and you make all the rookie mistakes. But as long as you learn from those mistakes and own up to them, I think that builds trust with the people that you're working for. And it also builds confidence within yourself as you start to take things on more independently.
I think that what to say and what not to say is a critical learning point too. I think even in my early days, I felt that same imposter syndrome, and I would listen to the language that people would use. And in the boardrooms and the conference rooms I'd sit in, I remember somebody, it's a very small term, but somebody saying that I was great at demand generation. And I nodded and smiled and then Googled what is demand
Yep.
generation. I had
Mhm.
no idea. You make a great point on owning up to your mistakes. And it's something we talk a lot about Sam sales, right? Fall on your sword, be open to learning. I think some people struggle with that. There can be a sense of defensiveness or there's subjectivity to the feedback that they get. What are your thoughts on that of how that makes you more approachable, how that helps you grow?
I love that question because I believe that a combination of transparency and vulnerability is the best way that any leader can create trust. So now I'm flipping kind of to as a leader, before I had my baby consultant hat on, now I'll put my leadership hat on. I have found that the speed in which we build that trust is exponential when we are humble and when we are vulnerable. And when we take the responsibility for anything that fails within the organizations that we run. Now, it's
Mhm.
important to fail fast, right? You fail fast, you learn a lesson and you move on, but nothing great happens if you don't try the hard stuff. And a lot of times the hard stuff, isn't necessarily the easiest thing to implement, but I'm a big advocate of falling on the sword for my team, maybe to a fault, but I don't know how to be any other way. And I think that my team appreciates that. And I think they take more risks and have more success because they know I've got their back either way.
Yeah. And let's go back to when you were still in your early days. And you said being in the boardroom was something that was more valuable at the time than getting an MBA. Walk us through that.
Yeah, and I can validate that because I took a law firm leadership course at Harvard when I started my COO job at Baker Mackenzie. And it was a course that was co-led by Harvard law school professors and Harvard MBA professors. And I was probably 34 at the time, so I had been working for 12 years, give or take. And it was me and a bunch of managing partners from law firms. So I was the only non-lawyer. I was probably one of the youngest, or do we say inexperienced now, executives in the room. And at the end of the 2-week course, I asked the professors, I said, okay, I've thought about getting my MBA. I've flirted with it in the past. In fact, I applied and got into an international program in my mid 20s and decided not to do it because I enjoyed making money and all this stuff and didn't want to be in debt again. But they said, don't bother. They said, at this point in your career, it's clear that you know so much from being on the job and from being in the room and from dealing with a multitude of different types of clients and different types of leaders and different types of colleagues. And at this point, he said they advised me to take advantage of professional certifications. And that's what I tend to do now. I'll brush up on a certain skill or do something that I find interesting through a certification program. But I think it was evident to the professors. And of course, it became evident to me as I was working more and realized that I knew so much about business through my consulting years, right? About 15 years total if you include my time in the business process outsourcing space. But it's the on the job. It's being thrown into different situations in different industries with different problems and finding solutions. And so that I look back and I feel like there's so much that I have learned, and that at this stage I'm kind of like been there, done that. And it makes it much easier to deal with new issues that come up that we don't have a playbook for, right? Like COVID, like a new administration, whatever it might be. There's no playbook, but you have to rely on kind of the skills that you've built over the years.
We see that too. You're being able to pull on from that on the job experience and the training of being able to look at something and say, I've been here before. I've seen the similarities in the work that we've done. I've been in this scenario before. Now, how do I take that skill set that I learned then, not from a book, not from theory, but from actual experience, and apply it to this? And I think that I remember reading back some time ago that some of the most prestigious MBA programs rarely take people who don't have at least 5 years of work experience. They don't want you to come directly from undergrad right into business school. They want you to go out there to build your network, to get some scars, which you and I have plenty of from the mistakes we've made along the way and learned tremendous lessons from. But they want that. So I think a perfect validation to what you're saying.
I agree. Nothing against getting a degree or going to back to school, closer to your graduation date of undergrad, but I do think there's a lot of value that we get by being on the job.
And sometimes just the benefit of the work experience that you have will outweigh the things that you've learned. Maybe the things that you can
Yeah.
learn are now in a certificate program. I feel during that time you must have grown tremendously. Any early lessons from that period?
Yeah, sure. So I think relationships are everything. I think relationships are everything in our personal life. I think relationships are everything in our professional life. And this appreciation for relationships dates back to my senior year of college when I was interviewing for full-time positions, and I was in a sorority, and our alumni advisor worked at Accenture, Anderson Consulting, right? And that was a really hot place to pursue at the time, right? You either wanted to go to Arthur Anderson or Anderson Consulting or one of the big four if you were in the business school like I was, right? So we all wanted to go to those prestigious organizations. And I knew that my advisor had worked there. And so I let her know that I was going to be applying. And she said, Jamie, I'm able to get your resume in front of the right person. But after that, everything is in your hands. You've got to earn this position. But I do believe that that personal connection and referral must have helped, right? Because there were thousands and thousands and thousands of applicants. So to have someone that knew me fairly well stick her neck out and say, look, you want to meet her. After that, it's up to, the organization and to Jamie to deliver and show that she can do the job. But that was the first example of me really appreciating the power of your network.
Same thing for me in college. I had applied to be a bookings intern at CNN where everybody wanted that job. It was really
Everyone.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be with the guests, all that stuff. But the relationship mattered, right? And the same exact thing. I'll get your resume in front of the right person, but what you do is up to you. But I think there are characteristics, again, the way that you present yourself, the way that you go about asking for the introduction, even your follow-up afterwards, whether we're 21 at the time when we're asking for it or 61 at the time we're asking for it. And I'm sure people have asked you to do the same. Some where you've said yes, some where you've said no, but thinking about what that person does to approach us in the right way makes all the impact as well.
I've even approached certain interviews or opportunities like big sales pitches or like, winning a big client. I was very fortunate during my second job after Accenture, where I spent about a decade working in business process outsourcing. And I started out on the analyst team, right? And so we would go out and pitch and sell new business, but I wasn't the salesperson. I was the person who knew the nuts and bolts and the operations. So I was very young age was selling without selling, right? I came in with the knowledge base and I really enjoyed it and eventually assumed responsibility for the business development team amongst other functions. And so when Baker Mackenzie, when that opportunity presented itself later in life, I said, okay, this is number one firm on the AmLaw at the time. This is a chief level role. I've never been a chief. I've never worked inside a law firm, although I had consulted many AmLaw firms at this business process outsourcing organization. I said, I'm going to treat it like the biggest deal of my life, right? And I'm going to create a presentation that's not too salesy, but demonstrates, why me? Why me as your chief operating officer? I showed up to the final interview, which was in person in Washington, D.C., and it's me and like 7 lawyers. They were part of the office committee that was making the selection. And I mentioned this was a big global firm, Baker Mackenzie. So I went to a local chocolatier before the meeting and I bought these little chocolate globe candies. And I placed them out at everybody's seating station. And I had a presentation of why select me. I came prepared with solutions and recommendations for what I had observed over the last 8 months that we could implement, days 30, days 60, days 90, as if I had already worked there. So it was like the presumptive close, right? I was literally operating as if I'm already here, I'm on your team, I'm ready to go, and I'm different. And I think I shocked people at first,
Mhm.
but obviously I worked. I got the job and of course then I had to deliver, but that's the fun part. So,
Music to my show me, you know me ears. I mean,
yes.
what a great way to stand out, not only from just the confidence of showing up to the table and saying, this is exactly what I would do. Here's my strategic plan. It's day one, effectively, even though you hadn't
Yeah.
gotten the job yet, but the above and
Yeah.
beyondness of being different. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be grand. What was the reaction to the chocolate specifically? Do you remember any of the voices in the room?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of them started eating them during the presentation, so that was flat. These are great, and they were just. I think the response was, "Oh, we should be flowering you with gifts and chocolates. This is so nice." And so it was absolutely unexpected. It was memorable, and apparently it tasted pretty good because they were going at it while I was interviewing. So
During your time at Baker Mackenzie, there's probably also, and throughout your career, some points where burnout might be an
mm,
issue, or burnout has
yeah.
reared its head for many an ambitious person, and especially an ambitious woman.
Burnout is interesting because I think a lot of people think it goes back to work life balance. And I don't believe in work life balance. I don't believe there's a balance of anything. And I'll kind of come back to that. My most kind of acute experiences with burnout were times when I threw myself into my job as a coping mechanism or a distraction because perhaps something else in my life wasn't going so well. Like, and I talk about this a lot. My father was diagnosed with CLL. It's a form of leukemia right in the middle of my time at Baker Mackenzie. And it was the first time in my life that I had dealt with something that was traumatic and close to home. He's now in remission. He's now in remission thanks to the
Amazing.
brilliant doctors at Dana-Farber in Boston, and he's doing great. But this was someone who was like my first mentor, right? And my dad and I were very close. And so instead of really addressing it, I said, well, I can't control that, but I can control work. And that was the moment that I really became a workaholic. And I was like, I'm just going to work. Work's going to be my identity. That's fine. It's a healthy coping mechanism to have. And it was fine until it wasn't, right? And I started to burn out. Thankfully, I had leaders who cared about me and encouraged me to either take sabbaticals or take some time or focus on my family and then come back. But back then, I think I needed that permission. I needed the permission of someone senior saying, take care of life. And it's okay if you're focused on something else for a period of time. It doesn't always have to be your job. And as I get more experience, I recognize when that time creeps up and I do it proactively. And so what I have found is that I don't have balance per se, but I've been able to integrate my life and my work in a way that feels good for me. But I think, Sam, balance and burnout is very personal. We are the only ones who know what we're willing to compromise for one or the other.
I couldn't agree with you more on the idea of not having work-life balance. And it's not that I don't have work-life balance, that I work too much. It's that I find a different way to balance that. My work and my
Yeah.
life are integrated. And I think it's not right for everybody. And I think it can also be an uncomfortable topic to talk about in our day and age where everybody's looking for that balance, for better mental health, et cetera. You have to pick what's right for you, right within a healthy limit. But for me, just exactly what you said, I can walk the beach and answer Slacks. I can run to Trader Joe's and take a call on the road to do something
Yep.
that lets me multitask. I can find a way to make these things integrate. And I think as leaders too, we can look for ways to help our people do that as well. I remember getting a lot of flack one time when I would take a class. I would take a workout class at 12 o'clock on Thursdays. There
Hmm.
was a spin instructor that I loved. She only taught once a
Hmm.
week. It was at 12 o'clock. And I remember the shock and awe that I got. Well, why does it matter if I'm in at 7 o'clock in the morning and if I'm still working an hour and a half at night? Why does it matter when I work? And I often find for those people who are top performers, who are great contributors, they're going to find a way to crush their goals no matter what. It doesn't have to be, and it usually never is, in the confines of a 9 to 5.
Now I'm leading a firm that fully leans into that proposition, right? 700 plus colleagues work in our largest office, which happens to be virtual, which I
Mm.
happen to be part of. Our chief people officer happens to be part of. our chief financial officer happens to be part of. And oh, by the way, our top few rainmakers happen to be part of. And what we have found, and the link is it really leans into working in a way that's best for you and your clients. And so to your point, Sam, it doesn't matter where you are as long as you're getting the work done. And yes, performance management is important and you need to make sure that people are delivering. But for those who are, which ideally are the ones you want to keep, giving that extra flexibility is such a competitive difference. And it goes back to trust, right? Trusting that our colleagues are doing the right thing.
I think what's different about what you just said, and may not be as much of a light bulb moment for others, but you called Link an office. You called the fact that
Mhm,
you have 700 remote workers an office. And I think
mhm.
people don't look at it that way. And I think how refreshing that you do, because that is it. Your office is the remote office.
That's exactly right. The reason it's been successful is because we manage it like an office. We have an office managing partner of the link. Heck, they have a deputy managing partner. We have office committees. And so and in fact, that office scored among the highest in our most recent engagement survey. And so just by shifting the mindset from virtual remote all over the place to this is a cohesive office makes a huge difference.
I think I'm going to say this outside of the legal space, but I think about a lot of senior leaders that I see talk about the return to office and how important that is. Outside of the legal space, this tends to come from, frankly, an entitled CEO that doesn't trust their employees, that wants them there, that I've seen so much as LinkedIn posts say, the reason I want you back to work is because I love the energy of the office. I love high-fiving people. And I'm like, well, that's great for you. But what about for all the people who value their time to honestly be able to sleep, to be able to work out, to be able to spend time with their families? What about new parents who don't have the opportunities to get proper childcare or that need some flexibility in their lives? So I think about this now back to the legal profession and especially FinServ, legal professional services across the board. There's a heartbeat to get people back into the office. There's a focus for that return to office. What do you have to say to that, where you guys are doing something a little bit differently?
I think a big part of leadership has to do with employers and employees. I mean, that's a corporate term, but employers and employees meeting each other halfway, right? I think everything is a compromise. It's similar to the work life integration discussion that we had earlier. And so I can appreciate how some CEOs feel about how do you create connectedness and culture and how do you train? I talked about on the job training being so important at the
Mhm.
beginning of this talk, right? And so, how do you marry that with this flexibility that I think a lot of employees desire? If you're willing to put the work into figuring out how to do that, how to create that engagement that I mentioned, how to make sure that the culture is really understood and how to make sure that we're training our young associates the way that they need to be trained, then I think you can figure it out. I think we can meet one another halfway, and that's exactly what we're doing. And a brief example of that, Sam, would be the fact that our first and second and third year associates do have to come into a brick and mortar office on a regular basis. So they're hybrid because of that on the job training. That's so significant. So they're in the room with our partners. They're on the conversations with the clients. They're part of the creation of the work product. That's one example of how we're meeting folks halfway. Like once you're trained and know how to be a lawyer, then you earn more flexibility.
And I think for you too, you've put a tremendous amount of work into building out the operations in your Tampa office as well. Why was it important for you to really build a presence in that area versus just saying, I'll be part of the remote workforce, I'll be part of our linked office here?
The Tampa is an interesting story. So I moved to Tampa with my prior firm, Baker Mackenzie. It was one of my fun stretch opportunities. I was asked to relocate to Florida and to build and lead a center of excellence. So we were migrating a lot of our business functions from higher cost locations in brick and mortar offices to centers around the globe. And so I came down here 5 or 6 years ago and I was doing that until the recruiter called with the Husch Blackwell opportunity. And Hush was so amenable to supporting my being part of the link for a couple of reasons. One's the Southeast is a target for us, right? And so we're always looking at firms that we can either combine with or have a conversation with. And so I'm in a geographic space that's important to my current firm. But the bigger strategic intent of me working in the link was that I could serve as a true citizen of the firm. I can be
Mm.
where I need to be when I need to be there. So it creates this flexibility not only for me and a nimbleness, but it also addresses any perceptions that I have of favoritism towards a certain office or that one office is more important than another. And so I'm really able to kind of share the love, if you will, and be with our colleagues in very intentional ways. And I think you lose some of that when you're going into a particular office every day.
Great call. And I think also going back to one thing you mentioned really quick, when the recruiter called me for this Husch Blackwell opportunity, I want to talk about that because I think
Yeah.
we've talked about how your network is really important, how your network is your net worth, which is so cliche, but so true. How did you even get recruited for this position?
Yeah. So there was this interesting post on LinkedIn recently, and I can't recall, so I can't provide citation, right? It was talking about over the course of the last 25 years or so, how has the power of your kind of network or the what it takes to move up within an organization or out to another organization, what was it all about? And the citation or the quote starts with the early 2000s, right? Or when presumably, when I started working for sure. And they talked about how grit, a degree, determination, getting work done, that's how you get elevated. And that worked for a while. Then introduced LinkedIn and, upward progression, upward mobility, getting new exciting projects or landing new jobs became much more about your network. So, in other words, who you knew. And that now with social media and influencers and podcasts like the one we're doing today, it's so much more about who knows you. So who knows you? Who knows who you are, right? And so we have all this new access to these platforms that really didn't exist. And so I would say that the Hush Blackwell opportunity was certainly much more of about who knows you because I was contacted by the recruiter at the beginning of the search. And this was a recruiter that had been following my journey and my career and had been watching what I was up to and thought that this would be an excellent opportunity. So they reached out to me. And at first I kind of hemmed and hawed. I said, this seems too good to be true. Law firms don't hire non-lawyers for chief executive positions. I didn't know a ton about the firm, but I did my research and I became so intrigued and decided to go for the role. But that was after attending a women's leadership panel down in Florida with a CEO who I knew really well through my Baker Mackenzie days. And she was on a panel and they were talking about imposter syndrome. And this one woman, I'll never forget it. She said, this huge opportunity came across my desk. What's the first thing I did? I talked myself out of applying. I talked through in my head all of the things that I could not do or that I didn't have the experience to do. And at the end of the story, she ended up saying yes. She got the offer. She was going to say no because she wasn't quite sure if she could do it. She said yes, and it changed her life. And of course, she's killing it. And so I was like, all right, I can do this job. And so she really inspired me to go for this role.
I think competing with so many people and then obviously getting a C-suite role, not being a lawyer as well, you probably faced some skepticism when you joined on board. Were you met with
Sure.
that? How did you get around it?
I would say I was met with optimistic skepticism, if that's even a term, right?
Cautious
I
optimism.
Cautious optimism, yes. So look, the team that hired me at Husch Blackwell was and remains to be so committed to my success because that translates into the firm's success. And so I came in with a lot of advocates and I came in with a very large group of lawyers who wanted nothing more but for me to find that success. Now, it didn't mean that it was easy to do, right? I was new to the role. I came in from the outside. I came from a much bigger firm. I had a different, even leadership style than my predecessor. So folks had to get used to that. And I think the biggest opportunity I had to prove myself that first year was, as cliche as it sounds, to deliver a really strong financial year. I serve at the pleasure of 200 equity partners, 200 owners, right? And that's a very different governance structure than, other industries, but it's the truth. And so I was very diligent in doing a couple things. One, really leaning into my operational background in year one and making a lot of enhancements to the business services functions, working with that team. And then two, working very closely with our industry groups, our lawyers, to ensure that we were delivering a strong financial year. Because if you do that, you can reinvest in people and technology and clients and colleagues and do all of the right things that are much harder to do if you're not delivering that.
I think two things to close out our interview. So one, I think you've been pretty vocal about your struggle with infertility. And I think that this would be
Mhm.
so inspiring for others to hear, just your points of view, the challenges you've gone through, anything you can share with us there.
Yeah, no, I would be happy to. When I was struggling with my infertility diagnosis, I was well into my career at my second job. It was during my workaholic phase. I was pouring myself into work. Then, boom, all of a sudden I find out that my future is not likely to include any biological children. And at the time, I was single. And so this news was kind of devastating, if I'm honest. And it wasn't something that we really talked about in the workplace.
Mm.
Because even if you think about 10, 12, 15 years ago, leaders weren't talking about
No
personal
way.
struggles. They
Yeah.
weren't talking about mental health. They weren't talking about mental wellness. It was there was none of that. And so I kept a lot of it private and kept a lot of it inside and just kind of suffered silently and was, looking back, was probably depressed for a good year or so, but I never talked about it in the workspace. And so as I started to heal and see what my purpose in life was meant to be, and that meant eventually meeting my now husband, who has four beautiful kids. So I'm a stepmom of four. My sister and brother started to have kids. So I was becoming to enjoy the beautiful benefits of being an aunt. And I also started to think about my role in business and being in a leadership position and the fact that it's allowed me to have an impact on presumably more young lives than had I just maybe focused on being a biological parent. And so I started to realize that my purpose on this earth is to, be that extra support because parents are fabulous, but this is a tough world. And the more adults I think you have in your corner and people who can give you good sound advice because they care, but maybe they're not coming from that parental angle, that's been really fulfilling. And so now I talk about this quite often now because I think a lot of people suffer in silence. A lot of women suffer in silence. And I think there's other ways you can find meaning. And it's not easy. It was a really hard time in my life, but it's one that I'm grateful for because it's made me, I think, a better stepmother, a better aunt, and just a better leader.
Outside of every wonderful thing that we could pull from that and the example that you're setting, et cetera, I want to talk about the fact that you're being open, vulnerable, transparent, you're approachable. And I think that's something that happens to executives, particularly women executives, is that as we climb the ladder, we feel like we have to close up or that we can't be vulnerable. We can't talk openly about things. And that makes it really tough to build relationships with those execs. But somebody at your level with all the responsibility that you have, sharing things like that, I think is tremendous. And frankly, will do things for talent attraction for the firm because this is the woman that I would work for. This is the kind of person that leads our organization and what tremendous value you bring just by being open. Question to ask you that we ask all of our guests: what does it take to book a meeting with Jamie Lawless?
People do reach out on LinkedIn. In fact, I responded to someone this morning, someone I'd never met. She was reaching out to let me know that she had applied for a senior director position at the firm, and she was sharing with me why she felt she was a great candidate, and it was great. And I wrote back. I said, "Thank you so much for letting me know. I'll make sure that the head recruiter has your resume." And so
Smart.
she might be listening to this. Yeah. So I do check LinkedIn. I do pay more attention to actual messages than the in-mail, but I should probably, or than the advertisements, but I should probably pay attention to both. And then I have she's my executive support specialist. I call her Kate the Great. Her name is Kate. She's going to be so embarrassed that I'm saying this, but Kate is someone who has worked with me at my last three jobs we just keep going places together. And, she's the real gatekeeper. So if you can figure out Kate's last name and how to get a hold of her, she's another great way to book some time with me. But I'm always willing to pay it forward. I'm always willing to give it back if I can make the time to do it. I think it's really, really important to do that.
And speaking of Kate the Great, I bet that you have her assistants like many executives do, which many sellers don't realize is the case. But Kate probably looks through your emails and sifts through things, cutting the noise out and making sure that it's clean for the things that deserve your attention. Is that right?
She absolutely does that.
Consider for every seller that's listening to this out there, the way that
Mhm.
we structure our emails, that show me you know me subject line, the way that we include information, let's say not just following up from LinkedIn, but thanks for getting back to me on LinkedIn to make it clear that we did have a two-way communication. That semantics and the language that we use is really, really important. So great final call out. Jamie, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated getting to hear your stories. And thank you for being so vulnerable with us as well.
Thank you, Sam. I love your journey too, and this was a blast.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Now let's get into it to answer some burning questions from our audience. All right, who's ready for Sam Spills? Let's get into our Q&A. Our first question is, I'm early in my career and determining my next move. What is the value of being a small fish at a large company or staying at a smaller one? Oh my gosh. So here's the best advice I can give you. When you think about the next job, don't think about the next job. Think about the next job. What do you ultimately want to do? Where do you see yourself going? Do you love small companies and you want to keep building and staying there? Do you love the experience of a small company, but you're really curious to round out your expertise and to have the large company experience? What are you thinking as the next job? Because if your goal, right, is to ultimately work for Fortune 500 and you've worked for a 30-person company your whole life, it's going to be a tougher climb than to say, I've already worked for an enterprise organization. I know what it's like. So if you've got the opportunity to take that leap, go for it. The thing to also think about, right, is what you love about your current role and what you don't love. Is budget hard to come by? Is there too much red tape because you work at a huge org and you wish you could build something with a little bit more nimbleness? Think through those things and then think about, do I want to stay here or do I want to take the leap and see something else? Okay, another question I've got is, what are some levers for my comp package that I can pull outside of base salary? I love this question. So everybody says, how do I negotiate my salary? I'm interviewing for a job. They tell me that they want me. And then they say, what comp are you looking for? What base salary are you looking for? Right? They might have given you a range. We pay between $140,000 to $155,000 base. And then we've got some other numbers, equity, things like that. But what are you looking for? What's your number? Obviously, you're going to say $155,000. But what if they say the range is 140 to 155? We like to offer you 143. Then what do you do? So my thing to think about, right, is that base salary for the most part is meaningless because if we don't know the rest of the numbers, we don't really have anything to work from. So my answer to that is to say, I can't really answer that without understanding what the full package looks like. So thinking about base salary, on-target earnings, if you happen to be in sales, what's the commission like? What are accelerators like? 401k match, equity, sign-on bonus, what does it even look like from a healthcare perspective? All those things are really important to me. So I can't really tell you what base salary is without knowing what the full package is, and would love to look at what that full offer looks like. Imagine, right, if somebody says we're going to pay you $143,000 a year and zero equity, zero commission, zero bonus, or they say we're going to pay you $50,000 a year, but we're going to pay you 30% on every single deal you get. And we're going to give you a signing bonus of $100,000. And we're going to give you an equity grant every 25 grand every single month would be great. But you can't really answer the base salary question without knowing the full thing. So look for that. I think just one other creative one, right? If you work for an organization that doesn't have a lot of levers or flexibility, what you could also do is to say, I would like professional development budget. I would like $10,000 every single year that I can spend on anything that enhances my professional development. That might be courses, that might be playbooks, that might be conferences I want to go to, including the travel for it. That could be books that I want to read. It can be online certifications, anything you want. You don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to get it approved in advance. You just say, I got $10,000 and I can spend it within reason on educational things that will enhance the job that I do now. That's it for this episode, you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Hey, if you want to stay up to date with all that's happening at Sam Sales, check out our show notes. You'll find a link to subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out twice a week. And if I do say so myself, our Friday newsletter especially is packed with insights and pretty funny to boot.